Full disclosure, I'm Robin Farzad.
In a world where we need instantaneous likes and tweets and that's what's going on, there's a positive side to that. That creativity happens in real time. And that is something that has never happened before.
That is Vann Graves, Executive Director of the Brandcenter, and he is ours for the hour. So do stay with us. Dear listener, this show airs on NPR member station VPM News, on npr.org, the NPR One app, and of course on iTunes at linkfulldradio.com. Well, folks, you've heard of Van Halen, Van Morrison, Van Helsing, and now in studio with us, Vann Graves, Executive Director of the Brandcenter, a 2-year master's program focused on marketing, branding, advertising, creative problem solving. He is a 3-decade veteran of the ad industry. Van has worked with such storied trademarks as Coca-Cola, MasterCard, the U.S. Army, M&M's, Snickers, Visa. How are you, sir?
Wow, that's a lot.
Do you tap dance as well?
I do, only on Tuesdays, though. Thank you for having me. This is fantastic.
Well, thank you for finally coming on. You've been here for quite some time. You came back to Richmond. We're going to talk about that.
Sure.
But I've only been throwing pebbles at your window at the Brandcenter for the longest time to convince you to come on this show. Take me back. I mean, you were born and raised in Richmond.
Yes, to the Wayback Machine. Yes, born and raised here. Just had a birthday, so I realized that it was I just celebrated my 30th anniversary of my 21st birthday. So
well, drink Bacardi like it's your birthday.
That's how we do it. That's how we do it around here. But yeah, being raised in Richmond, I actually never thought I'd be back. As folks do, you pack up, leave home, and never look back. And what was interesting was growing up here, Richmond was a very different town than it is today. It was very old school. People talk about the former capital of the Confederacy, and that was the Richmond I left. 2 parents that went to Virginia Union, not too far from here. They were part of the Civil Rights Movement. They were part of the Richmond 34. My father was actually one of the 34, the Richmond 34.
Tell me about the Richmond 34.
So here in Richmond, there was and I remember going as a kid, a great department store called Tallheimer's. And back then, stores were segregated. And so at the lunch counters, African Americans could not sit at the counter. So many students, more than the 34 that were arrested, many students from Union actually walked over and sat at the counter as a silent protest. Several were arrested, 34 of them, and ended up, it wasn't until 2 or 3 years ago that they got their records expunged. It was still in the record that they had been arrested.
And I saw the sign there behind the Dominion Energy Center. It's right there in the parking lot that I think where the Tallheimers used to be back in the day, in the era of "and we'll go downtown." Offline, everybody, Van has already heard me croon several things, including Tina Turner and Luther Vandross. But you're a young guy, you don't know. Another Van Halen, Van Morrison, Vandross.
I know them all.
The late great Vandross. But you were talking to me offline also about the storied The Deuce and Jackson Ward here. We had done some live shows initially at the Hippodrome, which was this vaudeville era theater. There's this storied jazz age history going back to the early 19-teens, right? And it fell into dereliction, but it had its jazz age prime with Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong and, the Commodores, Kool and the Gang, everybody there. But we were told that at one point it was a church, at one point it was a movie theater, at one point it was a house of ill repute. And it's almost a metaphor for all of Jackson Ward, where you now live.
Yeah, Jackson Ward, used to be the epicenter of African-American culture here in Richmond. Jazz, music, art, it was there. My great-grandmother grew up not too far away from there. And really where Gilpin Court is in Jackson Ward, before the highway was put there, that was also extended out. So even the St. Luke's original building for the African-American community, the bank, was over there in that area. And so there's so much that has happened to the area in the last few years that it's been amazing to see the growth and the change. But, you had the Eggleston Hotel. So where the Hippodrome was, folks would stay at the Eggleston, and it was the funky place in town to hang out, pool halls, and there was a lot of fun to be had and a lot of true culture.
Apparently, the legend of one of the Wall Streets of the South.
That's correct.
We talk about right. Maggie Walker, we talk about the Community Co-op Insurance Company.
That's right.
The family of physicians, the Egglestons, all of the pride. Going back on this, and this is a bit of a divergence, but what took that on the wrong road? Was it the interstate system? Was it – I mean, it was amazing to me that it had a period of thriving in spite of the fact that, we are the former capital of the Confederacy. We had that period of Jim Crow in the early 20th century and segregation and separated lunch counters. But you had this parallel kind of oasis of culture.
And when you say how it went awry, you mean as far as why it didn't thrive as much as it did over time?
Well, the dereliction, you're always told that into the 60s and 70s it just fell apart.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is, but it may have fell apart from a cosmetic standpoint. And I think people forget that the people that live in those communities, they don't change. So services may be taken away. A highway was built through the middle of it. But when you look at, the church system, you've got Six Mount Zion that's over there and a few others that are there. The community is still there, and the heart of Jackson Ward is still there. Now, we have a lot of regentrification that's going on now in the area, but when you look at the locals, that's still strong. So is there a level of poverty? There was a lot of, folks have moved out and sold their homes. Now they're being taken over and taken over in a way that has helped the community in a lot of ways, but has changed the community in a lot of ways. That's been impacted by VCU that's downtown and has done a lot to rebuild the downtown community because it wasn't just Jackson Ward. It also was all of downtown Richmond kind of went through, this kind of downturn for I would say about 10, 15 years.
And you graduated high school in 87?
I did.
And you take me back to that. Did you swear it off? You went to Howard?
I went to Howard, yes.
You took a midnight train to...
Ain't no party like a HU party because a HU party don't stop.
Okay.
All right, just had to put that out there.
Very good. So you thought you were never coming back?
I never thought so. But Richmond has evolved and has changed in such a way. I mean, yes, I left Richmond, Virginia, the former capital of the Confederacy, and came back to RVA, which is a much more vibrant, multicultural city, a creative city that I would have never expected. But I'm really proud of my hometown.
Could you tell me about your journey from Howard? We recently had Michael Paul Williams on the show telling us about his journey from a historically black college to Northwestern Journalism School and the transition from the hard Richmond, and he also differentiated RVA and Richmond does. But then going off from there and doing everything else you did, we're thinking about the ad industry, and it's not exactly the most diverse and inclusive historically industry. But how did you break into it?
So I started off so let me go in the Wayback Machine a little bit. So I guess my first taste of advertising really was Bewitched on TV. I think a lot of folks got their first taste of what that was, not in any real sense of what it was, but kind of understanding what it was. But really in the fourth grade at Ginter Park School in Northside, there was a competition that was put on by Greater Richmond Transit Company. And that competition allowed students to come up with a slogan. And mine was GRTC, saves gas for you and me. I came in second place. I still wonder who that person was who won first place, so I could say, I did it. I made it. But and just seeing how coming up with ideas was interesting and fun, and people supported that. And my parents, who came out of the civil rights movement, really very, very much like immigrant parents in the way of you can be anything you want if you work hard, as long as it's a doctor, a lawyer, or a businessman, or maybe a teacher on a good day.
Yeah.
So
I'm still dead to my mother, by the way. Hi, Mom. Love you. Go ahead.
But this idea of we've worked hard for you to do anything if we can understand it. And me saying I wanted to be a creative in an advertising industry, I mean, there were crickets. It was, people have the talk with their parents. It's usually around sex. Mine was around advertising, and it was the most uncomfortable conversation that I had.
But you knew as an undergrad at Howard that you wanted to focus in advertising and branding?
I knew before I went to Howard. And so I actually knew in high school after kind of these little dabbles growing up. But someone put me in touch with Mike Hughes, who was over at the Martin Agency at the time. And Mike really said, look, if this is something you want to do, leave Richmond, have world experiences. To be great at what you do in this industry is to have experiences that you can apply to your creativity. And I took that advice. I went to Howard. My degree was actually marketing on the business side of things. And then I kind of cobbled together this made-up group of elective courses of graphic design and did that while I was there, and just fell in love with the creative side. So though I'm a balding middle-aged man now, back then I had platinum blonde hair, 2 earrings, and yeah, I know, right? So, which really also made my parents wonder what is wrong with our child. But it was a good, but Howard grounded me in something, and I didn't realize how much that paid off because as the industry had changed, having business fundamentals as a creative helped me a long way in my career. I then left Howard and went to Pratt Institute in New York as a CommD major. I got my master's there. And that was really what opened my mind to all the aspects of creativity. And I had a lot of great professors who were like the old school, here is typography, and, understanding kerning and leading, understanding the beauty of paper that you're printing on. And so the real fundamentals of what design was about. And so I learned that at Pratt. And in the middle of that, in my Pratt experience, I had a chance to go to NYU. They had a great summer program for Sight and Sound Film. I did that. And so it just made me fall even more in love with the idea of being a creative in advertising.
You directed a movie with Ed Helms in it, is that true?
Well, yeah. So one of those little student films that no one likes to talk about, yeah. I'm sure he's probably rolling his eyes right now if he hears this. But yeah, it was we had an assignment for like a 2-minute film. I was lucky enough to have Ed in my film, and then Mark Webb, who is the director of The Amazing Spider-Man, and just, who knew that they were going to be these guys back then? They were just regular Joes. Really proud of them, and I know they're like, and he's an ad guy, but it's all worked out for everyone. But that experience really moved me, and just like not just the graphic design from Pratt, but also moving pictures and storytelling that I learned at NYU, and just all that coming together. And I was able to get an internship at BBDO in New York while I was still at Pratt through the MATE program, which is the Minority in Advertising program. And
BBDO is one of the big ad agencies.
Yes, classically known as Batten, Barton, Durstein, and Osborne. But yeah.
What is the first campaign you worked on as an intern?
So the first real project that I did as an intern actually was Phil Duesenberry's Dog's Christmas Card. Okay, I love that look. So I was an intern. So, the project that you got was, it's not like today where you come in and, you start off with working on big campaigns. That's just not how the world worked back then. So, you were lucky if you made someone coffee or, did more administrative work. And I worked on a personal project for him. And I remember there's a book that I read while in grad school about how to put your portfolio together, how to break into the industry. And it said, no job is too small. And I did this side project for him. And I'm going to tell you, he was so appreciative. He was like, this is a creative way to approach this idea and this concept, which was fa la 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 la, bow wow meow. That is my claim to fame. But he then made it a point to ensure that I had a job at BBDO after I graduated, and said, it had other projects for me to work on, and said, it's for me to get ready, because back then there weren't portfolio schools. There wasn't a Brandcenter. And because he wanted me to focus more on what advertising was. Yes, I had this great design background from Pratt and the things for NYU and the marketing, but it wasn't all brought together. And, I was kind of a project of his, and it gave
This is
me—
the early 90s in Madison Avenue?
Yes.
And did anybody anticipate the internet is kind of around the corner? I know we had the screechy modems and CompuServe and AOL by 93, 94,
Right.
But I'm thinking now, talking, as we approach, we're talking around 2020 now, and everything has been so pulverized and disrupted. You're talking to previously a print journalist who
Right.
thought it's unthinkable that, Newsweek and Time and Fortune wouldn't rule the world. But all of these dominoes have kind of tipped over, and we're going to get into this. The hegemony of networks who used to be able to mint money and everything has been completely smashed into tiny bits, and people are hustling for nickels and dimes on YouTube
Right.
and on digital instead of the huge, $100,000 full page ads.
Right. No, I think that, if I think about it, I think the biggest turn, I think the canary in the coal mine for a lot of folks was TiVo. And, I remember when our senior leadership was at BBDO at the time, really was concerned about the fact that people could fast forward through commercials. And And I think that was the tip of the iceberg. And I think later on when agencies, you had traditional agencies and digital agencies, and they were very separate things. And traditional agencies really wanted to stay traditional, and that was the pride in that. And digital agencies were the more nimble, flexible, little brothers that were really kind of making things happen. That I think was the first real tension around what technology is bringing to the industry and how we need to adapt. Then agencies kind of came around to the idea of, oh wait, digital is a part of traditional, like it is a part of all of what we do, and it's a part of business. So it's not a separate thing, but it actually has to be a part of our business model.
Full disclosure, I'm Robin Farzad. You are listening to Vann Graves, Executive Director of the Brandcenter. He is a 3-decade veteran of the advertising industry. He's won the Cannes Lion Award, Grand London International Awards, a Grand Clio. Prior to the Brandcenter, he was Chief Creative Officer at J. Walter Thompson in Atlanta, EVP of Global Executive Director at McCann, New York. Quite a storied career, going back to the late Mike Hughes, who you discussed, who kind of said, go out and sow your oats. Even then, you didn't expect that this opening would happen in 2018, and you would be called back to what you yourself said was a very different RVA.
Yeah. No, it was, I never thought I'd be on the educational side of things. It's very different. It's, being someone who spent time in advertising, understanding the craft and the importance of creative, understanding the importance of being strategic around what you do as a creative. I never thought that applying that to a job in higher ed would ever be anything that I would do. So I am lucky to be called home to do this and honored to do it. I've had 4 predecessors who've done a great job of setting the foundation for me, and I'm excited to look forward to the next 25 years of the Brandcenter.
Now, the Brandcenter was initially called the Ad Center, correct?
That's correct.
Now, just on advertising alone, I wonder, and this show, of course, is full disclosure, how often do you get accosted at cocktail parties and somebody gets a couple drinks into you and says, Vann, just be honest with me, between us, is advertising just BS? I mean, the metrics have always been squishy. There's this idea that agencies of record need to believe the fiction, that chief marketing officers need to tell them back and forth that it's working. And because it's always worked, we just keep each other in business until it doesn't work, until the magazines dry up, until there aren't full-page ads, until people aren't watching commercials and they're TiVoing through things. I mean, you have to admit that there's a big, great existential rethink right now. Nobody loves banner ads. We had Kristen Cavallo on the show, and I pointed the same question to her. I know it's a threatening question and it terrifies people. Do these things work? Are now the metrics themselves not dependable?
So I think they work. I think they work well because you have to realize that you think about our country, you think about our economy. It is a capitalistic society. There's always things to sell and to buy. Now, the platforms upon which we sell them, there's no more print anymore in the same way it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Radio is very different. Now it's called podcast, right? TV is now streamed, but it's still that. So the form changes and people still do react to it. We have to be, especially as we train our students, we have to be polymathic. We have to be able to adapt and grow and have in our toolkits the ability to be flexible. But I'm a big believer in advertising. Now, again, it's not what it was years ago. And, you're talking about branding, you're talking about marketing, and they've all converged. I think back in the day, they were very separate things and never talked about as a community or toolkit of how you approach business. But now it's just as important as ever.
You're talking with your students, though, and everybody this year is talking about Disney Plus, the $6.99 a month teaser rate, Netflix, the preferred tier of Hulu, Spotify. These things are all best enjoyed without advertising.
Right, but
people are opting out of advertising.
It hurts.
Even YouTube Red.
It hurts. It hurts on the inside. Yeah, no, it's true.
Cry for me, Vann. I want you to share.
Deep down, it hurts. No, it's true, but it's just taken different forms. You still have product placement. You still have, the things that are going on with Instagram ads. So people are in our consumption of content, how we approach brands is very different. But we're still connecting with them. And brands have to tell a story today like they didn't have before. Brands are a part of, 20 years ago, you wouldn't hear brands taking a side on political issues. You would not have taken a stand. But now folks that are investors care about what's going on and how their brands are in the world and what they represent.
What about the shock of, and I'm thinking of Kraft Heinz, you may or may not follow it. It's been just a disastrous, massive merger that was backed by Warren Buffett and another group. It took a $15.4 billion write-down. People are just not as brand loyal anymore to Heinz ketchup or the other things of, they're willing to buy things off-label. I'm sure you've been to an Aldi grocery store where a lot of millennials and Gen Zers are much more interested in just getting things that are no frills. Amazon has its own thriving no frills Amazon Basics labels brand. This is a problem because there's so much goodwill put into these brands. When you make a massive acquisition like this, a big chunk of it is the holding value of the goodwill. Mm-hmm. And now people are wondering that, you see things in CVS. There are Kind bars. There are other things that have 4 or 5 ingredients on it. And there's a giant rethink with the big consumer packaged goods companies. Like, are we far too invested in brands that meant something to the 1990s and 80s and 70s in the middle of the grocery store while everybody else is kind of taking mindshare?
Right. Well, the reality is, though, Aldi still has brands. There's still brands out there. Now, brands have to grow and adapt. They have to change to a changing marketplace. But the reality is the brands aren't going away. They're just morphing and adapting to the culture of the buyer today, which millennials are thinking differently. So I remember in the early 80s, everyone was doing generics, which is kind of where we are today, but except it was a white package with black letters.
It was like austerity driven.
Yeah, exactly.
During Morning in America and stagflation and
that's right.
And everything else like that. This is kind of just opting out. This is maybe a bit informed initially by the Great Recession.
Correct.
And millennials' choices and millennials being broke, entering the workforce and whatnot. You could backwards analyzing at times a million, for panels. But it does kind of make you wonder, right?
Well, we have to rethink, the consumer base, because millennials are a very different group of people, and they are our student base. And the funny thing about even at the brand centers, faculty, staff, we learn from our students as well, because you're right, the approach to brands and the relationship to brands isn't what it used to be. And so that adaptability has to be not only from the advertisers, but also the folks in advertising agencies, the folks that run brands, the CMOs as well, because there is no charted course yet, and we're still figuring it out and still adapting to it.
There's a stat in parallel to this is what's happening in cord cutting, where to further explain it for our listeners, where you're cutting out the likes of Comcast, AT&T, Uverse, Verizon, Fios, and saying, no, you are not picking out my channels for me and charging me $150 a month and a cable box and everything. I want you just for your broadband Wi-Fi connection, whether I use Roku or Apple TV, and I'm going to go and opt into the streaming services that I want. According to Leichtman Research Group, the top pay TV providers now account for about 85 million subscribers. The top 7 cable companies have 46.1 million video subscribers. Satellite TV services have 26.3 million subscribers. That means another approximately 34 million paid TV subscribers could be at risk of canceling their service. And now all of these guys, as you know, are trying to race. Comcast with Peacock streaming, CBS digital. They're trying to go in and belatedly recapture the money with streaming packages.
Right.
And we're all worried about this kind of creep. At what point do you a la carte build it and end up with $150, $60 total of bills at the end of the month?
You're back at square one, right?
How much does that worry you?
It doesn't worry me because, again, businesses as brands also have to evolve. And so, yes, you're talking about Comcast, you're talking about other brands that way, but you have to think about the fact that Hulu, Netflix are emerging brands. It's not even emerging anymore. They're brands that are out there that have just changed the marketplace. So, what's the old saying? If you don't evolve, you dissolve. And so there has to be – the marketplace drives evolution. And if you don't push yourself as a brand, you will fall behind.
I just watched 3 hours of The Irishman on Netflix. My brother's login, by the way. Thanks, bro, for letting me mooch continuously. There wasn't a single brand in it. I mean, maybe Texaco got a product placement or something. Again, I'm paying for the premium experience of having to avoid this.
Right.
Because of the DVR, which you go back to the TiVo experience. We, what are the things that are mandatory live viewing right now? Sports. Maybe some of the networks tried like Peter Pan Live.
Right.
Or what was a reboot of All in the Family Live? I mean, it was kind of painful to watch.
But those are part of the learning process, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and maybe I am nostalgic for old school, but I'm excited about new school. And so having kind of grown up in the industry in the 90s, you see and you look at where we were as far as brands and how folks engaged with media as a whole back in the day versus today. I mean, we were passive engagers, right? So it came on TV. Your whole family sat around TV to watch All in the Family or whatever, and you'd break, and that was it. And you'd go to the bathroom, whatever. Now you can fast forward through whatever you can do because
you can binge an entire season on Hulu.
Exactly, because millennials have power because technology has given folks power today, not just millennials, but have given folks power today to really engage with their entertainment and how they consume it. And that's new. And we're all trying to figure that out. I don't think anyone has nailed it. I think some folks have done it better than others. But I just feel like that's a constant thing because you never know. I mean, if you think about it, what if we all said, hey, there's this cool thing called social media. Let's figure out what it's going to be like. It's important to focus in on it. And so we dumped all of our money and time and effort in MySpace versus Facebook.
That's true.
Right? So, but very similar platforms, but one has done phenomenally well and the other one hasn't. And so that's what I mean when I'm talking about kind of survival of the fittest and what the evolution looks like. But Facebook as a brand in and of itself has evolved even over the last 5 or 10 years. So it's how you change your business and how you move that direction.
Vann, I believe that the children are the future. You teach them well and let them lead the way. And in your case, you're talking about your students. This is the perfect transitional device for you to tell me about the power of the students. And this is beyond millennials at this point.
Yes.
I'm reminded of the story of someone who I admire quite a bit, and I'd love, by flattery, to invite him on the show, is Marques Brownlee, which you might know as MKBHD. This guy was born in December of 1993, and he posted up, he joined YouTube in March of 2008. He first started uploading technology videos in January 2009. I mean, he was a student, I believe it was at the Stevens Institute or something in New Jersey, and his reviews just became so popular that over time he has over 9 million subscribers, 1.40 billion total video views. In 2013, the former senior VP of social for Google called Marques Brownlee, quote, the best technology reviewer on the planet right now, close quote, which I think must have been terrifying to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, to Newsweek, all these people that thought they had a lock on. And this poor kid, he's not a kid anymore. He's, 25. He's getting all this swag from Samsung and Apple and Tesla.
I'm a little envious.
That illustrates the power of one person and the no-cost, low-cost platform of YouTube. And we know with the advent of the smartphone, everybody's carrying an HD camcorder in their pocket right now. They can record podcasts and the like on that. That must be both fascinating and terrifying to your student base. These situations of people coming in having already been ninjas in high school and college.
No, I don't think necessarily terrifying. I think what it does is, again, it keeps you gully, right? It keeps you on your toes and trying to figure out what the next thing is.
Did an academic just use gully?
Did I? I did. You've got to really, again, you've got to stay fresh. The one thing that has been consistent through this industry as a whole is you've got to keep things fresh. You've got to, things are always shifting and moving. You've got to be ahead of it. You can't be chasing it. If you're chasing it, it's way too late. And, you're right. The smartphone has changed everything. And so creativity is commerce. Commerce is creativity. What does that look like? You monetize certain things now. You monetize YouTube. That's changing. And so we constantly have to figure out how, and our students they're doing it every day. How do we make content? How do we make creativity? How do we problem solve in a way that services our brand, services our clients? Many of our students, they not only work for big agencies anymore, they work for platforms. They work for Facebook. They work for Google. They work for Spotify. Our students are working for consultancies. So it's changed. All of it's changed. So even the academic side of things, many of our students now are focusing in on being entrepreneurs themselves. So they're picking up their cell phones and creating content in their own way because none of it's prescribed anymore. And again, we're dealing with now 1 and 2 generations of folks that are looking at how do we create and build on our own terms.
I mean, it's a true disruption of the printing press and the means of distribution and production. It's,
exactly right.
Again, anybody can post these things to YouTube, to Libsyn, to SoundCloud. I mean, talk about podcasting. That now has become kind of a mandatory skill set for any corporation.
That's right.
You know, you want to have a specialty in something, you could go on Twitter or Instagram and see endless ads about a corporate podcast on the future of innovation. Goldman Sachs, I mean, you cannot possibly block them on LinkedIn. They're out there doing these interviews all the time. These were things that were supposed to be they were non-core. They were decidedly like you might have a creative agency come in and do them for a shop. But now if you come in, I guess they don't just expect their advertising agency of record to do these things. They're breaking up that commitment into several different things, both in-house and out-house.
That's correct. And there's so much to what's happening with brands bringing things in-house. I mean, people weren't talking about TikTok a year ago or 2 years ago, and now that's a part of where folks are shifting. Less folks are talking about, at least younger folks are less talking about Facebook. They're not interested. Now the interest in Instagram, same thing. So I may sound like a broken record, but understanding the ability to be adaptive and flexible is what is key to the survival of brands and this industry as well.
How much have you studied Little Nas X and Old Town Road? Because, I mean, that also was done over hustle and YouTube. And
right.
Is that a case study for our times, like the biggest hit of 2019 coming in? It had been a crazy year that way, too, because nobody expected Popeye's chicken sandwich to question the hegemony of Chick-fil-A.
Right.
And then what else was the thing? I like to say hard seltzer. Like if I told you at the beginning of 2019, you're like, I'm going to tell you right now, son, Popeye's chicken sandwich, hard seltzer, and a gay cowboy of African-American background partnering with
Billy Ray Cyrus.
Billy Ray Cyrus.
Yeah.
I mean, you cannot predict these things. You can't get your hands around.
But I think that's what makes it all exciting. There's a level of, or taking away the predictability of it all. You never know what is a hit. Like you can sit in a room and strategize and it still be a flop. And then all of a sudden, there's this song that, like Old Town Road. I mean, my kids are singing that, right?
Non-stop this year with my kids.
Yeah, over and over again, which,
But could you have taken out metrics or used like a marketing agency or business school, a brand sizing strategy to have predicted like, this will be the year of the rap country crossover thing?
I mean, but that's the excitement. Again, that's the excitement of it all. The fact that there is still a level of randomness and accidental creativity. And, Lil Nas X, part of it was he was already trying to find out what his thing was in this social media side of things. And, hey, let's do this thing. And by the way, the song, which was then rejected by the country music community, so Billy Ray was like, no, I'm getting down with this and, helped to shift it, because that's the other part about it. You can be adaptive in real time now. So you can hop in a studio and redo a song pretty quickly, and it not only be a hit, but it's a hit twice because you've taken it to the next level. So bravo. But that's where, in a world where we need instantaneous likes and tweets and that's what's going on, there's a positive side to that. That creativity happens in real time. And that is something that has never happened before.
Can't nobody tell me nothing. You can't tell me nothing. Full disclosure, I'm Robin Farzad. You're listening to the musical stylings of Vann Graves, the executive director of the Brandcenter. He's been there since August of 2018. When am I allowed to reveal that your family is finally going to be coming here in 2020?
Yes. So not much. I mean, my family is a private family.
All right, it's a private family. All right.
But a family for money. No, it's a
oh, touche.
No.
Man, you get me so well.
Yeah, no, it's what I can say. It's really exciting. I've been commuting back and forth to Richmond, and now fully engaged with and excited that my family will be here in the summer, which makes life a lot easier when you don't have a commute just to hug your kids. So I'm excited about that. And I don't know. It's not a lot to say about that except for the fact that family is important to me. I mean, again, especially here in Richmond, since I've grown up here, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents. My wife and I are my wife, who I met in New York City while in advertising, through someone in Richmond, introduced us. And so Richmond is our spot. So to be able to have everyone here is crazy and awesome.
And you may ask yourself how you got back to a place that was an abandoned belt factory carriage house, the picture of dereliction there, the downtown expressway. Now it's kind of like a gorgeous Googleplex-like thing. I encourage everybody, if you can, get a tour of the Brandcenter. I mean, there was really nothing there before. There's a portrait inside that shows like tumbleweed.
Yes.
I mean, all the whole Monroe Park development area, and that area is just being built left and right. You're right behind the Jefferson Hotel.
That's right.
You're near a corridor. There's brand new creativity back in what they call the Arts District, right? Quirk Hotel, the resurgent theater scene.
It's a funky area. I mean, it's great. I mean, the interesting thing about that and talking to family about, so my great-grandfather used to work at the Jefferson and worked in that building when it was a carriage house for the Jefferson.
Get out.
Yeah. So it's, when I walk in, in many ways it's a religious experience and a very personal experience for me to be in the building and, talk about full circle, right? So that's awesome. And then seeing what the area has become over the last few years, because you're right, it was really that building, that space was the vision of one of my predecessors, Rick Boyko, and and he also helped to rename the Brandcenter, like how do we make sure we stay relevant? And, we've been able to not only stay relevant, but to grow and thrive in this area that is now thriving around us as well.
Vann, I want to get into the advice portion of the show.
Sure.
To the extent we have you here and we want to have you on the show again. What do you say to students who seek you out, both high school people, relatives, nephews, nieces, people who are considering the Brandcenter, people who are later in their careers? I mean, what there's been since the worst of the Great Recession a big rethink of the rate of return on a college education and all the debt that goes with it and being saddled for debts for jobs that maybe in previous generations might have serviced that debt. But everybody's second-guessing that right now. And that obviously includes grad school, and especially if you're worrying about continued disruption of broadly writ large advertising, marketing, and branding. Why would you're making the case to someone to come to the Brandcenter. You're also making the case to companies to recruit from the Brandcenter. How do you do that?
Very carefully. No, the Brandcenter is a unique place, and, we have stayed small and continue to stay small for the reason of we want to ensure that our students have a curated experience. We want to make sure that, we have each incoming class has about 100 students. We don't want to do too much more than that because we really want to make sure that we can focus on our students. Because, the idea of printing degrees is nothing that we're interested in doing. And so that curated experience includes everything from helping them understand and deal with the stresses and craziness of what this industry can do. Because being a creative, and all of our students, be it a creative brand management student or a strategist student, is just as creative as a copywriter or an art director. We're making sure that they can deal with the fact that you can't fall in love with your own work, right? You've got to be okay with there are a lot more no's on the creative side of things of business than yeses. And so how do you cope with that? How do you answer the business question for your client? And so what we focus in on is not necessarily building a portfolio, which you do get a portfolio leaving the Brandcenter. We focus on really building the cognitive understanding of business, of brands, of creativity, how they all come together. How do you creative problem solve? How do you, become a creative problem seeker as much as a problem solver? Because not always do your clients come to you with a problem. A part of your job today is, hey, how do I make my business better? How do I think about my business? How do we want the world to think about our businesses? And so we train our students for that. So we have a unique program. It's not necessarily for everyone. It is graduate school. It's not easy. And when we do interviews with students to join us at the Brandcenter, we talk about that, and we really want them to be ready for it because it's a challenging program because, to your point, they're challenging times in this industry, and we want them to be ready. We want our students to be polymathic. We want our students to think in ways they've never thought before. we're not focusing on teaching them how to deal with a particular platform. We're trying to build them a toolkit to approach any creative problem in front of them down the road.
So what is an example? Like what if a huge consumer packaged goods company comes there, or a Google or a platform company? Everybody has such different needs right now. What do they see in the value proposition? And you place, your graduates have a high placement rate in terms of getting jobs, and some luminaries out there in the field. Give me some great examples of how this worked in the current environment of disruption across various industries.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. Our students are, and you mentioned Netflix earlier. I mean, we've got a great copywriting student who works right now at Netflix. Because we're platform agnostic. It's really about how they approach things, how they learn, how they apply those things. Matter of fact, not too long ago, we had Howard Jordan, who is the student I was mentioning, who works at Netflix and working on several shows for Netflix. And, having, this is where the benefit of the Brandcenter, to your earlier question around, how do you, what do you say to students? The fact is, the Brandcenter's biggest asset really is its alumni base. And that alumni base touches across, again, many ranges, but also many of them are entrepreneurs. So they're also making and creating not only content, but also products. And I don't know how much I can get into that, so I'm going to steer a little bit away from that. But, what I can say is the Brandcenter experience for our students is multi-layered. And not only are they focusing in on their work with their specific tracks, but our alums come in as teachers. We just hired 2 professors who were alums who've worked in the industry.
Turn it around. Tell me what you're learning from the students themselves. It's a constant learning process. You're talking, in 2019, people who were born at the turn of the century, roughly, who are coming and telling you that this is the next TikTok, or this is the next level of this, or influencers. We're going to be looking back at Instagram and saying that that's as risible as MySpace. Like, what's the next big thing coming down the pipe?
Yeah, I have to admit, there's many conversations where I think that, I know that, I shouldn't think that they're teaching me, they're teaching all of us, because there are things that they're dealing with. It's interesting. I think there's actually this trend to go backwards. I think that there is this trend to move away from technology and learn hand skills. It's interesting. I had a student today really talking about, I understand that we can type things and create things online, but how do I do a thumbnail? Like, what is a thumbnail? And showing it, how do you sketch out an idea? How do you build an idea? And just seeing how they really do want to step away from their computers or technology and make and craft and create outside of kind of what we've assumed the direction will be. And I think that that's really been something that has been amazing to me, because as we're moving forward and we start talking about platforms and what we build around that, they're kind of moving away from it. I think that there is this idea of, of kind of Big Brother in the sense of, my creativity does not have to be expressed or validated on social media for me to be okay with it. And there's kind of a taking back of who they are, and they don't want to give that much of themselves out into the world unless they want to and choose to. It's interesting to see how that's happening in at least in our students.
Vann, from the traditional, agency of record perspective, it seems like for the better part of a decade, every agency account has been under review. This is the sword of Damocles. Like I said before, it's one thing, it used to be that one brand would stick with one shop for the longest time to take care of all these various responsibilities. Now you're smashing it into bits, giving social media to somebody, giving magazines and other things to others, giving events and podcasts to someone else. When and if do we get past the point that this is always going to be one of the most cyclical industries out there, that companies have been trained to say the instant we hit hard economic waters that's when the advertising and branding budget gets eviscerated?
I'm not sure if we'll get past it. The reality is it's still, money driven, right? And so if product isn't selling, if things aren't moving, budgets need to be cut. And quite frankly, as, external servicers, as many agencies are, you're gonna cut an external provider or vendor before you cut anything internally. So I think that that's unfortunately built into the business model. You know, I have to say, though, and there's some folks who will disagree, that there was something about having many things under one roof. If you really want to tell a clear story, I think from a client's perspective and from a marketing CMO perspective, you're spending a lot of time now of dealing with 4 or 5 different places to tell the same story and making sure it's cohesive. I think that's a lot. And I think if you find the right place, you can do some great work under one roof. But I think that the power of having options has also allowed CMOs to actually spend less money, focusing on what's important. So, hey, you know what? Maybe we're not doing classic content. Maybe we're only doing a podcast. And so we want to focus on who does that well. And I think that a la carte approach is going to be the future, even though I do, like I said, maybe because I came up in the old school way of kind of under one roof. I think there are benefits of both. And really figuring out kind of what's best is kind of the challenge for CMOs today.
Talking about CMOs, what about this idea out there that the chief marketing officer itself is increasingly becoming an optional title in the C-suite, that's something that you can farm out and break into several different pieces?
I'm not trying to force anyone out of their jobs, but I think that it's a reality. I mean, I think that everyone has become much more savvy around creativity, around what works with a brand, around storytelling. And because of those things, I'm not saying that the need of a CMO isn't there, by no means, but what they do, I think, has changed. And if you're approaching that role as someone did even 5 years ago, it's not going to work.
The holiest question for the longest time, I mean, your predecessors have faced it at the Brandcenter as well, is how do you inject diversity into this industry?
Oh, my.
It's forever they've been criticized. I'm thinking back to, everybody's always going to ask you about Mad Men. That's never going to stop because that, by the way, was so unlikely. If somebody came to you in the early aughts and said that there's going to be this super polished, expensive series on a second-tier cable network about the advertising industry and its smoke-filled heyday and everything, you would have said that's laughable. They use it as a vessel to tell another story, and now everybody – you talk about Christmas season, cocktail party season.
Right,
you're going to have to be answering about this show forever. But it does point to a time where this was such a monolithic industry, and an industry that, like many others, has dealt with its Me Too crises. You saw it with the Martin Agency and its team there and its reckoning there. How do you encourage people to come into this, diversify it, considering the extreme cyclicality of it and how monolithic it's been in the past?
Okay, that's a scary question. I should leave now. No, I'm kidding. It's
because we see blow-ups, man.
Yeah,
we see ads that are then pilloried. Like the one this Christmas season, everybody's talking about. I'm sure you heard is like the Peloton ad with.
How dare you ask give the gift of...
Oh, honey, look, am I looking better than I did at the beginning of the year? She's looking gorgeous January 1. She's looking similarly gorgeous at the end of the year. And there's got to be a tone deafness. Or when people, certain magazine covers in the past that have been tone deaf because you clearly had a monolithic group of eyeballs looking at that.
And it may not have been. The interesting thing is it may not have been a monolithic group of folks. And that's why, when we talk about this idea of diversity, it's really about representation in the room and having more than just one, having one woman or one minority, because you're not going to feel comfortable speaking up because then, Bob or Sally or whomever becomes the bad guy because all of a sudden, she represents everyone from her gender or he represents everyone from his race. And you really have to have diversity built into the culture as a whole and not be this idea of diversity theater where, hey, we look like a classic Benetton ad, but really have stakeholders that are of diverse backgrounds, different genders, different identities, because that's when true change really happens. At the Brandcenter, it's important for us, we realize that this industry and many of the recruiters that work with the Brandcenter have asked us, what are you doing with diversity? What does that mean? How do you approach that? And, we train qualified students. And what we realize is to bring in qualified students of a diverse base, we have to do better with scholarships. We have to do better with funding because it's not that these folks don't exist. They do exist. I was one of them. But having the opportunity to go to school like a Brandcenter, we have to work and have been working to ensure that we as a pipeline to the industry have diverse students so that when recruiters do come, they see students that are diverse across the board to hire into their ranks, because we're not going to solve this by one program. We're not going to solve this over a 2 or 3 year period. It has to be a focused effort across the board. And the Brandcenter, the faculty and staff, we're committed to that. And we look at our numbers and are really proud of the direction we're moving in. So, but it's something that's going to take time. It's going to take time. And, reference to Mad Men, if you think about it, we only look at only part of the story. So no one talks about, folks like George Olden, who was a creative at BBDO and McCann back in the 60s. Carolyn Jones, no one talks about. So there are people there that we also don't, our heroes aren't diverse people, even though they were in this industry. Carolyn Jones and her team, I guess when she was back at Mingo Jones, did We Do Chicken Right for KFC. You look at folks like Harry Weber, who did Stuck on Band-Aid back in the day. We don't hear these stories, but these are things that were going on and have been going on from a diverse group of people. So these are a part of advertising culture that also need to be illuminated in ways that it's never been done before.
The few minutes we have left, I'd love to talk about the overlap. Now, you talked about Netflix previously, but there seems to be a blurring of lines between journalism and branded content specifically. The Meredith Kopit-Levien at the New York Times they built T Studio, which I remember, Netflix, when Orange is the New Black, one of the seasons came out, they commissioned a very polished mini documentariette about women in prison. You see everybody, the old Time Inc. properties have branded studios now. As they are diversifying and integrating into what was formerly the province of ad agencies, how much are you being asked to increasingly foray into journalism? I mean, your students, for example, if they have podcasting abilities, if they have production abilities, they could be called into PBS or NPR.
And that's true. And, and it's funny you mentioned T-Brands, because one of our Directors Council members, one of our advisory council members is a president of T-Brand Studios and has asked questions around that and ensuring that our students are ready, because that's a reality. It's not just making ads anymore. It's making content that is engaging. It's making content, selling stories that people can engage in. And it's the expectation of our hiring managers.
So are there public, and it's still an existential question for newspapers, for magazines that are belatedly having to go into video and other things. Are you getting these overtures from these publishers and these media companies to kind of come in?
Right now, light touches, but not in the way that, I think it's coming. I don't think it hasn't been a full-fledged, full-court press.
What about these platforms that you talk about? I mean, this is the lament of people, is that the platforms have taken over the world. Whether you're Facebook or Twitter, there's now this duopoly. All of the honey of advertising has been sucked in by Google and Facebook. Right. And, it's kind of a drink your milkshake type thing.
Right.
But we're now beholden to platforms and big tech, 5 or 6 or 7, maybe 4 or 5 of these companies, whether it's your iCloud account, your Amazon Prime account. Facebook wants you watching highly polished series here. Twitter is doing something. Amazon wants to maybe get Thursday Night Football. Have we become beholden to these platforms?
Yeah, but I go back to an earlier theme, which is these platforms are just like networks used to be back in the day, right? It's share of eyeballs, right? How can we get people to look at our stuff so we could sell it? How do we make that happen? So, though it's packaged differently, I think how it's being approached and dealt with is very much the same. How do we get people to look at the stuff we make? What is engaging? How do we do it? How do we break it down? And so I don't think that part of the story has changed. The thing about it is, though, to your point, there's so much of it. There's so much noise. How you up your game and how you can get folks to pay attention is much harder than it was years ago. And I think that is really where people are looking for, like you mentioned, The Irishman, people are looking for things that are truly engaging versus eye candy and flash. And that's where, we come in on the Brandcenter side of telling stories, narratives that are real, that are human-based and not, hey, look at this, aren't we cool? Because it's not selling anymore. No one cares about that.
If there is going to be a backlash to the platforms and big tech, and curated content is going to be very important, privacy is going to be important, what can your students do? What can the Brandcenter do to kind of be at the vanguard of that?
I think our students have already started to think about that and kind of, how do they want to be good citizens? I mean, we talk about big tech. I mean, that's business, and that is kind of, we've monetized people's privacy. And they're much more private, but they also, our students, want to ensure they do great work. And they're figuring out ways to really approach that creatively. And do they have an answer? Do we have an answer at this point? Absolutely not. Because, you're right. It's big business. It's big money now. I think that the reckoning comes, in 5-10 years where, students. I think consumers are just going to opt out as much as they can.
We're not on the brink of that right now. I mean, the election, aren't you amazed that people go back at that and it's like, wow, you bamboozled me then. And not only that, we've slapped him on the wrist several times. He's gone in front of Congress. The stock is always near an all-time high.
Right. But because it's entertainment in and of itself, which is, it's actually created its own content, right? So even all the crazy, for some reason, our political landscape is based in Twitter and sound bites. And how quickly I can get it on Instagram. And it's become a part of it. There are news agencies that are making money off of, hey, so-and-so said this versus that. Hey, well, that's not real. That's fake. And so even that in and of itself has become a financial benefit for folks, right?
Scary dystopian times. I mean, I'm thinking about how crazy the world is, and that you said it was your grandfather who worked at the carriage house at the Jefferson Hotel, which fell into dereliction by the time you were a young kid, in Jackson Ward? Mm-hmm. And now you are the executive director of said internationally renowned Brandcenter that converted that carriage house into a gorgeous academic facility. Any other predictions from your crystal ball? Is there going to be a backlash to the backlash? The things that you get, what should I have asked you today? Put it that way.
I mean, I think you've asked a lot of great questions.
That's why I get paid the big bucks.
It's really, the crystal ball is what is the future of creativity and what does that look like? And I really feel like it's going to be a move away from, what I can do within the platforms. I think about what creativity looked like, when the Mona Lisa was created. You take 2 years to create one painting, and you've got now artists that are worried about how many likes they have on Instagram and the stress around that. And I think that there's going to be a nexus of, I just want to be creative. I just want to make, and I just want to enjoy. And I think that years ago when people talked about kind of this idea of a hipster movement, I think that folks will start to look at, let's go back to the basics. Folks are looking for, and I see it in our students, a level of decency, a level of respect, a level of communication around views that we disagree with. And I see a move back to civility and human contact versus likes and friends online to really connecting with people. And I see that with our students.
Vann Graves, it's great that Richmond has you back. Thank you so much for joining us. Vann Graves, Executive Director of the Brandcenter. You are always welcome on this show.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Full disclosure, our engineer is John Valentine. Enjoy this show on NPR member station VPM News, on npr.org, and on iTunes at link fulldradio.com. We are platform-agnostic podcasters of record. Eyeballs, eardrums, bring it on. I'm Robin Farzad, back with you next week.